When we created this card earlier, let me just click on it, we used the filters pane. We drag the continent out of the population table or query, and we dropped it into the filters on this visual. So continent became a filter for that visual, and the continent that we chose was Europe. Now, this is the population for 1900 to 2100, so I want to be able to filter this card, and in fact a number of cards on this page, by a particular year. So I don't want to use this filters pane. I'm now going to collapse it. Instead, what I want to use is something on the visualizations pane. And in particular, I want to use a slicer. Now I have nothing selected. I'll just click on the report canvas and I'll insert a slicer. And there it is there. Now it wants to know, what do I want to be able to slice by? What do I want to be able to filter by? Well, I want to be able to filter by year. So in this years query or object here, I want to drag the column or the field called year and drop it on the slicer. So now I have a slicer that allows me to filter this card and in future other cards by year using this, basically what they call a range slicer. As I drag this here, I start to affect the value that shows on this card because I am filtering using this range slicer. But a range slicer isn't always the best use of space, or isn't always easy to use just by dragging. So in the top right corner here, you can change the type of slicer from being a between slicer or a less than or greater than slicer to being a drop down. And if I click drop down, I'm able to now hit the drop down and choose a particular year I want to slice. Let me just move this over. So if I chose, for example, 1935, that was the population for the entire Europe in 1935. If I hold the control key, I can choose 1940 and 1945. So I'm seeing the population grow as I see those 3 years. If I click back on one option, I will go back to seeing all. So you click something and then you unclick it to go back to all. And so this is a drop-down slicer. But the other type of slicer you can choose is actually a list slicer. This takes up more space. This isn't effective use of space because it creates a large list of all the options in year. And so again, I'm able to choose one, or hold the control key and choose more than one, or click back on it and turn it off and turn it on and switch back to all. Of all the 3 slicer options for this particular dashboard, I'd like to change it to a drop down, and I'm going to resize it and I'm going to pop it in the top right corner of this dashboard, so just about there. Actually, I'll make it narrower. Yeah, okay, so there's my slicer. It's a drop down slicer. Now, what else do I want to do? I think I want to format this particular slicer. So some of the formatting options you've got available to you. If I click on the slicer and I go to the visualizations pane and I click this option, I can format this particular visual. And the sorts of things I want to do is go to the values chevron and expand that, and I'll set a background color. So here's the background chevron, and I'll hit the drop down and I'm just going to choose white 10% darker, and so that has given a background to that particular slicer, and I can collapse those back up again. The next thing I want to do is I actually want to go to the slicer settings, and here I can show the option all just by turning this on. So I choose that option there, and then when I hit the drop down I get the select all option at the top. If I turn that off, you'll notice there is no select all option at the top. So I want to turn that on. I want them to be able to select more than one year by holding the control key. So I will not turn on single select only. I'll keep this option turned on. Other options you might like to look at are under slicer header. The slicer header, for example, you can decide how you want to apply a title. So I've got year here, and that's the header that you see at the top there is year. So I might change this to select, and then at the end of year I might put in brackets an S, because they could select years, And you can see the title just updating at the top of the slicer. So give it a title. And then again, I might want to go to the, turn the shadow on. So I'll go to General and I'll go to Effects and I'll turn on a shadow. And so there's a little bit of a shadow now going on with that drop down. And so I'll resize it accordingly. Yeah. So the other thing I'd like to do is control some of the formatting of the cards. This card I want to show in billions rather than in trillions, because when we get down to smaller populations, trillions isn't going to be too meaningful. So I'm going to go to Visual and I'm going to go to Call Out Value, and instead of display units automatically, I'm going to tell it I want to see it in billions. And so now I'm seeing the information in billions. It's a rather large figure because I'm seeing 1900 to 2100. So if I hit the drop down on year and actually go to say 2000 or 2020, I think I'll go 2000. So the year 2000, we've got 12 billion, and 2020, we've got 15 billion. So I'll go 2020 and I'll keep that just sitting on 2020. So 15 billion world population, just Europe, 15 billion. Now I want to make a copy of this. So I'm just going to click on it, Control C, Control V. There's a quick way to duplicate a visual. And so I'll just move it and pop it to the right here. I want to set the font size to 40. So I'm going to select with the Shift key or the Control key, both of those cards. I'll go to Format the Visual. And as far as the font size goes, I'm going to look under General and I'm going to look under Properties. Nope. Sorry, it's actually under Visual and under Call Out Value. The font size is currently 45. I'm going to take this down to 40. So it's not so large. So that's the font size set for both of those cards. Now this card is the same value because it's not showing me Asia. So I'll now go to the Filters task pane and I will hit the drop down and I'll take the tick off Europe and I'll put it on Asia. And so that's the population for Asia. And I will collapse the filter. So that's the population for Asia at 2020 and the population for Europe at 2020. Now I need a card also. Let me just be happy with the size of these cards. I just think they're a little bit too, so I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. And you can just use your arrow keys on your keyboard just to nudge things over. So I'm just reducing that a little bit as well. And I'm just going to nudge it with my left arrow and put it under there. The height, I might take that up just a smidgen. Now you can actually hold the Shift key. Right, now I want to duplicate this. Control C, Control V. I'm going to pop it under Africa. And Control C, Control V, pop it under Oceania. And Control V, put it under Americas. So you don't have to go Control C each time, you just Control V. I might actually click each one of those using the Shift key or the Control key, and under Format and under Align, I'm going to align them to the bottom. Now this one here, Africa, I'm going to go to Filters and I'm going to expand the continent, take off Asia and put on Africa. This one here, I'm going to expand the continent, take off Asia and put on Oceania. Click on this one and take off Asia and put on Americas. Actually North America and South America, so both of those get ticked because they're the Americas. So you can tick more than one option, and then I'll just hide the filters pane. So we've made a card, we've got it formatted and looking just the way we want, and then we've basically duplicated it, Control C, Control V, and we've changed the filter using the filter pane to represent different continents. But if I now want to go and change the slicer to show me the year 2000, then those are the figures for 2000 that I have. And these are the figures that I have for 2005, and these are the ones for 2010. So yeah, and then I'll just collapse that back to 2020 and collapse that back up again.